this is the Cat's Library. I'll be your librarian today. The intro that I wrote down was, in this video, I'm going to redraw the character reference sheet that I made in this video. And if there is time, I might try animating him. But then, I started trying to animate him, and it took significantly longer than I expected. But I wanted to see it through until I was happy with my work. The goal wasn't to get it completely done with color and everything, and I could still do more on the past that I did get done, but I'm really happy with the movement and the acting, and I'm proud of this even though I've never animated before. Engage speed paint! So this is an animation video. Why am I drawing this reference sheet again after only 6 months since I drew the last one? Well, it isn't that I was gonna draw the other character I mentioned in that first video for a surprise Halloween special, and I rushed the reference sheet in the original video since my priority was on redrawing the illustration, and I couldn't look at it to draw the character sheet for the other character without deep psychological distress, and I wanted to challenge myself to draw the page better. I just can't think of a better reason right now. For those of you who are putting off watching the previous video but will get around to it after this, these are 2 separate characters. The first one is a guy named Ryan, who was an actor in a high fantasy world. The other guy is the character that he plays, who is called Snorri, and who is the transportation specialist for a travel agency in a workplace sitcom. The character design in itself was pretty quick since I already had decided a bunch of the decisions in the first pass. This time around, I simplified a bunch of the shapes and worked at having different sizes of shapes on the foundational sketch layer. I don't know what the term for that is. Spacing? Interesting proportions? Anyway, I made his head, feet, hands, and tail tuft bigger. I made his antlers thicker and hypothetically easier to draw. This story is a newer idea that I've been trying out, so I don't have a full plot yet. But if I did, and this was an actual TV show, I'd have the antlers be 3D models that I would composite onto his head after the animation was done, or just have the model to trace over so that the antlers were consistent in every shot. I still like this more Eastern style design that I have going on with him. Most of my dragon designs are Western, or just weird. One of the more noticeable things that I changed without realizing it was that I took the scales off of his face. This made him easier to draw and allowed for the eyes to be bigger, but it does make him look more like a cow with antlers. I just realized that I got a significant way into the animation without drawing the scales on his neck, which might have contributed to him looking less dragonish. I think I'll keep the chest scales in the design for the dragonishness of it all, but I might leave them out of this first experiment. Another thing that I changed was that I must have done some torso studies, since the redraw looks a little bit more accurate. What I'm not sure about is that he's supposed to be tall and thin and a bit snake-like, but now he looks average height and a little stocky. Maybe it's because it's just him on the page, and if I drew him standing next to another character, then his intended body type would be more noticeable. I also simplified his feet so that they're literally just a couple of squares. This makes my life so much easier. I can barely draw feet as it is, and drawing feet consistently in different angles is even harder. With drawing hands, I have good days and bad days. Feet are always hard. I changed Ryan's clothes to red and blue since that matches his eyes better, and I made Snorri's shirt white to contrast with his hair and fur. I made his fur darker since it looked too gray and purple in the original. The problem with this change was that it was harder to read his expressions, and so I added a highlight layer. This character design sheet isn't perfect. I changed the muzzle on Snorri's back shot compared to Ryan's. Snorri's bangs come down too far on the turnaround in comparison to the headshot. It makes him look like a late teens emo instead of an early to mid-30s. I mean, he's much older than that because he's a dragon, but he's mentally about 30. I went with the original tail poses, but I made Snorri have horrible posture while Ryan has slightly better, and so their tails should be reversed. Snorri's staying up solely through core strength. The tails do look heavier than they actually are, but that lion tuft thing is just hair. I do like how they look like separate people, mostly through body language and expression. The difference with the hair was in the first character sheet, but I really emphasized it this time around. I was thinking about changing him to a purple and yellow color scheme, but I realized I really liked the red, blue, and black. It's mildly patriotic looking with the red and blue, but also a little scary with the mostly black creature with red eyes. I might have subconsciously been incorporating my cats into the design, since I have a black cat and another cat with blue eyes who has red pupils in some lightings. It is a nice, morally ambiguous color scheme. In reference to my idea of trying to make him dark purple and bright yellow, I made Ryan's highlights yellow and Snorri's purple. In universe, the TV show lighting is different than the lighting on the talk shows, and so it reflects off his fur with different colors. Yellow makes sense for Ryan because he's outwardly a pretty cheerful guy, even though the first time he ever tried acting was with a fairly grumpy character, so maybe he's repressing all of his anger and playing Snorri is his only outlet. Snorri is a lesser noble, but I can't really think of a better reason than that he is specifically associated with purple. Purple and yellow just look really good together despite being opposites. I've been trying to practice drawing my more cartoony characters without highlights and shading, since I tend to rely on those too much. Also, I was mildly traumatized by the 5-color 20-character video. Theoretically, highlights take a lot of time to animate. I need to work to fine-tune them so that they appear only where necessary. I don't want this video going over the whole deal with these guys again, and I don't want to spoil stuff for future videos, so I'm going to talk about talking animal stories in animation to fill up the runtime. There are different reasons why someone would choose animals instead of humans for their story. They are easier to animate, supposedly. Animals have similar personalities than people and so are easier to turn into archetypes. However, I noticed a trend where current animated movies are a bit more complicated than just having archetypes. They are becoming more literal in that the predator and prey dynamic is questioned, but more metaphorical in that different animal species are supposed to reference different human races. I think questioning why different talking animals would eat each other was first done in Lion King, but I could be wrong about that. If you saw some of my drawing animal from reference videos, then you'll know that talking animals eating each other has been around in storytelling for a very long time. It's just that the eating was either literal to the type of animal because they functioned like real animals with human intelligence, or strictly metaphorical for those in power taking advantage of those socially under them. These newer movies and shows that I'm talking about treat it like cannibalism, which I'm disturbed by even implying in a kids' movie. It simultaneously demonizes a natural part of the ecosystem. Some movies like Lion King, Madagascar, and the Ice Age movies sort of get around the first problem by treating eating meat as a choice. In Lion King and Madagascar, the lion protagonist can substitute talking animals for bugs or fish, which are implied to just be bugs and fish. In Ice Age, the saber-toothed tiger just decides to stop eating meat, and we don't actually see him pick a substitute. He does go hunting for gazelle in the third movie, but hits a mental block and is unable to actually catch his prey. But other than that, the filmmakers just ignore the issue entirely. I barely remember anything about the fifth movie, so maybe they mentioned it there. I don't know, and I'm not watching it again to find out. This issue can be mitigated in stories where prey animals are the protagonists. With pretty much everything made by Don Bluth and Disney's Bambi, the predator's animals don't usually talk and are just animated and written like monsters. The new problem that causes is that humans still like cats and dogs and foxes and T-Rexes and humans, which are the target audience in most cases. It also continues to invoke my second problem listed earlier. An exception off the top of my head is the owl from The Secret of NIMH. The owl is scary. It is clear that he does eat mice, however he spares the mouse protagonist when she proves she has a good reason to come and ask for help. I haven't seen The Wild Robot yet, but I've heard that that movie might have something to say about this topic. No spoilers. That leads to the question of nature and nurture and whether there is an exclusive human ability to transcend these things. The more animalistic a character, the more you can get away with them eating other animals, but the more humanistic the character, the more potentially problematic it becomes. The Secret of Nim is a more serious story than Madagascar. It's about the world being a big and frightening place which cannot be changed. Some of the characters were genetically modified later in life, but for the most part, the characters have to find a way to work around their limitations. With Madagascar, the premise is a bunch of New Yorker zoo animals escaping to the wild. It's about what happens when the repressed animalistic desires of the subconscious mind overpower the civilized conscious mind, and how to channel those feelings into something productive. It's also a super goofy comedy with penguins who weaponize their cuteness. The other thing that these movies sometimes have is an analogy of different animal species being like different races or discriminated groups. That would be like Zootopia and The Fox and the Hound. Zootopia is about prejudice and discrimination and stereotypes, and they go out of their way to say that everyone is capable of those things. The Fox and the Hound is about racism. It's my opinion that there's a difference between those things, but I'm not entirely sure what that is. Anytime I try to understand how a racist would logic themselves into that conclusion, I can't really understand it. I think that racism is purely illogical, but discrimination has some flawed framework behind why it exists, but racism incorporates some flawed logic applied afterward to make it seem logical. I told you I have no idea how this works. My best guess is that I think of racism as being about hate, and Zootopia isn't about hate. It's about fear and disinformation. Since Zootopia is supposed to be about different types of people battling stereotypes or falling into them, the very assumption that predators want to hurt prey is fundamentally wrong, even though the very words that they use to define themselves prove the opposite. The big twist at the end is that all animal species are capable of savagery, and so the predators, despite all other specific traits, aren't really very different from everyone else. The Fox and the Hound, in contrast, is explicitly about the two main characters being friends, and then later in life becoming enemies. It shows the self-destructive nature that hate can lead to, and that innocent people can get caught up in the crossfire. I never really liked the ending, though. Now that I'm older, I think it's because the philosophy that foxes and hounds need to remain separate was proved right. And even though Todd and Copper forgave each other for their fight, they still lived in completely different worlds from each other in the end. I think that this was intentionally a bittersweet ending, since I heard that the book was a straight-up tragedy, and the two of them mentally iterate that they'll always be friends. It'll just feels a bit hopeless. I'd have liked the ending better if they had a conversation about how their lives were going, showing that their relationship had evolved into an adult friendship, and they were making it work despite living in different worlds. However, that might have made the movie too long or something. I still really like The Fox and the Hound. Part of the reason I think animal stories lend so well to this type of narrative is because race is sort of a mixture between culture and physical characteristics. With animals, you sort of understand the culture right away because animals think and behave differently from each other. And they also look differently from each other. It takes some of the edge off so that it's more accessible to a general audience. Like Zootopia literally has characters devolve back into wild animals, and they also make a shocking number of nudist jokes. But it's fine, because animals are supposed to be wild and nude. In The Fox and the Hound, the whole purpose of the dogs is to hunt birds, which from the first scenes are shown to talk. They actually show dead birds, but it's fine, because they're just birds, and the audience wasn't emotionally attached to them. Very similar to the scene in Ratatouille with all the dead rats, now that I think about it. The major problem that I have is that when animal species are supposed to represent race, then interspecies romance doesn't make sense under that analogy. Sometimes it's implied that they can't have children, which muddles the metaphor since people of different races biologically can have children, and sometimes they can make brand new races out of people out of that. Something that I've seen every once in a while is that if two animals of different species can have kids, then the kids will be one or the other. This sort of ignores the existence of mules, coy wolves, ligers, and the such, and also is not what happens when two people of different races get together. It still breaks the analogy. I'm not sure I've ever seen it with a blend of both species. If that were the case, I'd want to see how far that could go, more than just a romance between a hypothetical mouse and an elephant. I'd want to see the full timeline of elephant/mouse hybrids and other hybrids that could merge with until in the far distant future all of the animals are completely unrecognizable. But that's just me. So all of that was a background to this idea that I had the other day. Earlier I said that you could tell a lot about how an animal character thinks and behaves by what species they are. In Zootopia, the species a character is a superficial trait, and who they really are is more complex. They purposefully divert expectations on how the metaphors behind making the characters animals in the first place is supposed to work to tell a story about questioning assumptions in the real world. My hyper-specific, nitpicky problem is that who the characters really are does not have a metaphor. There's no reason why the fox is a fox other than to act like a fox sometimes and not act like a fox at other times. This doesn't ruin the movie for me, but my personal tastes are based solely on neurotic overthinking of very dumb things, and so if I were making a story with a similar premise, I would do things differently. I was thinking that if I were doing a talking animal story, I would reverse the reversal and have actual human races be a thing. African animals are Africans or African Americans, European animals are European people, so on and so forth. The characters rarely ever mention what animal species they are and usually refer to race. The species is representative of the deeper layer of who the characters actually are. It would also be fairly literal to what actual animals are like, and so a lion would want someone who gets them in a romantic relationship, and they could only really get that from another lion. Mixed race relationships can also be represented by foxes and rabbits and wolves and things who marry across country lines because those species can come from anywhere in the world. The animals would be more on the humanoid side of the spectrum for that to work. Another idea that I came up with while writing the script is the version where all the animals can procreate with whatever animal they want. They would be mostly animalistic, but with the ability to talk and reason and stuff. No humans. The idea that I had to get around the eating each other thing was either much more disturbing than the original problem, or sort of funny. The idea was that the only food that actually wants to be eaten is fruit. So maybe this world has a meat fruit, where it has the consistency of raw meat, but doesn't have any nerves or muscles or actual blood, it just superficially appears to be meat. Different varieties of the fruit appear even though they are in the same family. Like some have a scaly shell, and others have furry or feathery shells. The seeds are white bone-looking things in the center. Herbivorous animals probably find the fruit sort of creepy and metal, but it's just a fruit. It's just not something that they'd ever want to try in most cases. The fruits usually taste better when they are cooked, and in the case of omnivores, when they're supplemented with other fruits. That is all for the nonsense part of the program. For the animation, I wanted Ryan to get into character as Snorri. He's looking one way, and then a director or a fan asks him to get into character. He non-verbally agrees and waves his hand in front of his face to get in the zone. And then he smiles as Snorri. I wanted to have their smiles look different, and I decided that Snorri would be a bit more mischievous, because even though he is a pretty serious character, he probably still has a playful streak. I started with a really thick wobbly brush and drew all of the poses on one layer, so that I could see them all and then put them into separate layers. I want to reiterate that I've never animated anything before. I have no idea how proud or embarrassed I should be about this. The next layer I tried to draw closer to the reference sheet, but I can never draw a sketch correctly the first time around, which I knew and planned 3 layers from the start. I don't know if Photoshop had an onion skin option, and so every frame I drew with a different color. I put on a clipping layer so that all of the drawings were uniform black when I played through the whole animation. This choice was actually a bit late into the process. My sister thought that he was at the disco. I did not do every frame for the sketch layer. This final layer was about as far as I was going to go for this experiment. Maybe sometime later I'll figure out how to do a cleanup layer and get him fully colored, but this was taking a surprisingly long amount of time just to get this done. I was considering getting the beginning of the rough pass over the sketch layer and release the video like that, since it effectively proves that the design works. Except for the neck scales. I still don't know if that would work. The design might work better overall as a fully 3D model. For this animation, the plan currently is to add the scales on the color layer. For the animation I did get done, I used random colors at first and then started trying to have a bit of order to what the colors mean. With the first head turn, I originally had fewer frames. You could barely see it. And so I added 4 drawings, which made the movement work. I wanted it to still look like he was moving his head fast, to contrast with the slower finger gun and then the fast hand wave. I decided to have his head stay still when he waves his hand in comparison to the head turn on the sketch layer. For a bit on the first sketch layer, it looked like he was slapping himself in the face. I don't know what compelled me to animate a hand in a variety of different angles, but I think I managed to make it look passable. I actually had a lot of problems with his shoulder, which was weird since waving a hand in front of the face is more of an elbow issue. It's almost as if I didn't know that, and so I suffered for nothing. I really liked doing the in-between frames. I can basically just trace the drawings before and after, and I don't really have to think too hard about getting the proportions right. I kept drawing the in-between drawings, and then I would go back to drawing what I'm going to call the keyframes, and it would take me twice as long, or even more than twice as long. I'm not sure if that's just a me thing, or if it actually is easier to do the in-between frames. After watching a few more tutorials, I think what I actually like is a type of in-between frame called a breakdown, which is halfway between the keyframes. I only did some of the standard in-between frames though, since it would take 8 hours or so to get the whole animation done. This whole thing could have used twice as many drawings. Something that I was aiming for was different speeds of movement, which the in-between drawings could have helped with, since more drawings make certain parts of the animation look slower. As is, I think I did manage some subtle differences in speed. The original animation that I did was a bit too fast, and so I have 2 versions in the showcase. One is the original, and the other is a version that I slowed down. I tried to get the first one on 1s, which is where if a film is played 24 frames per second, then there would be 24 unique frames. And the other is roughly on 2s, where there are 12 unique drawings, but they are each held for 2 frames. I think I accidentally set Photoshop to animate on 30 frames per second. I tried to set the keyframes on the slower part of the animation to hold for 2 frames from the start. I don't know if that is correct, but it does look good. That would mean that for the half-speed version, then those frames would be held for about 4 frames. Is it over? Am I finally done? Did you like, comment, share, and subscribe for this video? Are you excited to see if I possibly get my Halloween special out on time? Okay, bye!